Hey everyone, Ash here for the Triple S League with a quick guide to lockpicking in Kingdom Come Deliverance. The first thing I'll say right off the bat is this is so much easier to do with the keyboard and mouse as opposed to playing with a controller. I actually prefer the controller for most of this game, but I switched to the keyboard and mouse for the lockpicking because otherwise it just makes me want to pull my own eyelids off. Unfortunately for those of you who play on consoles and are stuck with the controller, that is not an option. The good news is that patch 1.3 is supposed to be improving the controls for the lockpicking minigame for controllers, so that's some good news for console players and PC players who prefer using the controller. As of recording this, that patch is not yet out, but I'll include some tips for doing this with a controller after I go through the basics here. The first thing you need when you're going to pick a lock is, of course, a lockpick. There's a few places you can get them. You can buy some from the merchant in Talmberg, but there's a way you can get some for free right near the beginning of the game, and this is really helpful. I have another video showing how to do that, so either click the overlay that's appearing on the video now, or find the link to it in the description below. So there's basically two parts to the lockpicking minigame. First, you move this cursor around. If you're on mouse and keyboard, you move it around with your mouse. If you're using a controller, you use the right thumbstick to move it around. You need to move it around until it turns golden, like this. Now you've found the sweet spot, and the larger it is, the closer you are to the center of the sweet spot, and that's the best place to be, is as close as possible to the center of the sweet spot. This will of course be in different places on different locks. Now the second part of the lockpicking is where it gets tricky, because you have to rotate the lock mechanism while keeping the cursor in the sweet spot, and the sweet spot moves with the lock mechanism. So you have to move that cursor around the circle at the same speed that the mechanism is turning. Now if you're playing on keyboard, you press the D key to turn the lock mechanism. You have no control over the speed of it, so while it's turning you have to move your mouse cursor with it in a circular motion, staying within that sweet spot and staying as close as possible to the center of the sweet spot until it gets far enough around and the lock opens. Now, on a controller, you rotate the lock mechanism by moving the left thumbstick around in a circle. And while you're doing that, you have to keep the cursor in the sweet spot with the right thumbstick. I'm not gonna lie, it is brutally hard, and I really feel for those of you who are playing on consoles and don't have the option to use a mouse and keyboard for this. But like I said, the 1.3 patch is coming, and hopefully that will improve it somewhat so it's not mind-blowingly frustrating to try and do this. Some tips for doing this successfully. Before you start turning the mechanism, try and figure out where the boundaries of the sweet spot are, try and get a feel for how big it is and where it lines up between the inner circle and the outer circle, because you don't just have to worry about keeping the cursor going at the same speed that the mechanism is turning, you've also got to make sure that you're not going too far off to either side, because that's just as bad. If your cursor falls outside of that sweet spot, it damages your lockpick, and if the lockpick gets too damaged, it breaks, and they're not exactly cheap to replace, especially early on in the game. So, figure out where the center of the sweet spot lines up between the inner circle and the outer circle, and imagine that center point as a line traveling around in a circle around the entire lock, and try to keep your cursor on that line while the lock mechanism is moving. If your cursor falls outside the sweet spot, the lock mechanism will stick, and this damages your lockpick. Rather than just try to jiggle it back into place, just stop. Just release it, let go, start over, and cut your losses. You'll do a little bit of damage to the lockpick, but if you try to jiggle it around too much while the lock is stuck, you could just completely break your lockpick. Some specific tips for using a controller. If you're on a console, it's not a bad idea to turn off the rumble. It's hard enough to do this when the controller is sitting still, let alone when it's vibrating like crazy in your hands. Another thing to make it a little easier is to push that left thumbstick all the way to the edge. Push it as far as you can before starting to rotate it around. You'll have more control if you push it right to the edge of its socket as opposed to trying to hold it in a state of tension. Finally, early on in the game, you might want to burn one of your Saviour Schnapps before you do some lockpicking so that you can reload if your lockpick breaks. This is a good way to get some practice in without burning through a whole bunch of lockpicks while you're still trying to just learn how to get the basic technique down. So that's how you lockpick in Kingdom Come Deliverance. Once again, I do have another video showing you where you can get your hands on some free lockpicks right near the beginning of the game, like before you even leave Skalitz. So that is something that I think you'll find very helpful. So check the description below for a link to that. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and sub, and I will talk to you later. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and sub. Write your most profound thoughts in the comments down below, and then check out some of these other videos.
What if it rains?
Find the link to our Discord server and other important stuff in the description below.